a little bit in the beginning. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, actually. I'll get it straight. It's all running together. Um, so as we let people come on, how's things going for you in this lockdown, lock in? We haven't had some time to be able to just connect over a dinner like we normally do.
Right,
So how's
right,
things going for you as we wait for some folks to join us?
right. Things are going well. As they can be, right? I think one of the biggest things during this time is just learning how to adapt. So, cooking more at home because we can't go out to restaurants. Um, Definitely newer ways of communication with family and friends. So, Zoom, FaceTime, Skype, whatever it is. So it's been a good period just to learn how to adjust and pivot. Um, but definitely challenging, testing how much we're just able to really shift during this time. How
Yeah, I
about you?
know. I know. It's like I wish I had stock in Zoom before all of
Right, right,
it because
right.
it's a Zoom meeting almost every minute of the day, right?
Yeah,
But it's all good, and as long as you can adjust, that's what we do. Inspect and adjust in
yes,
my world. Uh,
yes.
so we inspect and adjust. So, good morning to everyone who has joined us. It's great to see you back here. We are actually at our last episode in Watch Your Step. We've done this for this is our third week. We plan
Yeah,
to really help people adjust to the culture and be aware of the different things that they might see in cultures in their companies when they go back, or even their organizations when they go back. Every organization is impacted. And then we
absolutely.
move from there to bringing your best self, being your best self. How do you really brand yourself? And here's an opportunity to reset. We hear a lot about resetting and making sure that we do some real inspecting and adapting, right? But today we wanted to talk about biases because we run into them all the time, and we're ready to talk about them when it's coming against us. But we also want to share when we are showing bias towards other people in other situations, and where it could definitely stop our success and our growth. So
Yep.
I know you've been doing a lot of. Let me first introduce Carice for those who don't know you. She is a phenomenal woman with a real passion for women of color in the workplace, and she's coming out with an app that's going to really help women in that space. She is really passionate about the diversity and inclusion space, done phenomenal research there, and is an up and coming that you want to follow. You
Yes.
want to follow. We've worked together in the past, and I've had the opportunity to mentor her and some of the ways that the track she's on, her success track. So I'm happy that I was able to be a part of that success story that I'm calling It Is So Now.
Yes. Thank you for claiming
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So, but in some of your research, and I know you're out there seeing what people are talking about in that diverse and inclusions, diversity and inclusion perspective, as well as equality, equity, right?
Yes.
And how does biases play into all of that?
Yep. So one of the things that I know that we talked about during our last session while we were here is really when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it is really something that is table stakes for every company right now. As we're pivoting and the unemployment rates are at just an astronomical high, right? Extremely high. One of the most impacted people are going to be your people of color, right? So as you go into organizations and you're watching your step and you're making that shift, it's really important to understand what is the company's corporate response strategy. How do they actually plan to employ more people of color because we're the ones most impacted during this time, and how do they intend to give us opportunities once we're at the corporation. So that was a topic that we talked about during our last conversation and touched
Yep.
on the week before. So I just wanted to bring that in for anyone who wasn't in that session. Now,
Yep.
for today's conversation, as we talk about shifting and pivoting into an organization, what we really want to talk about is, are those biases, right? So once we look at an employee life cycle and the stages coming in from how they attract talent to how you get recruited and onboarded to your day-to-day activities as you're there to promotions, and then eventually retention or exiting the company, right? So the normal life cycle that every employee or employer really is going to go through. And at each step of the way, there's a potential for a bias that you can face, or you can be actually giving off if you're the in the position of the employer or the company, that
Right.
we have to really be aware of during these times. It's really sensitive, as you know, folks are going through family issues and loss of life and multiple things that they're dealing with, right? So, how do you actually be conscious and intentional as you're going through this process of hiring and searching for jobs?
Right. And so I know we should step back and talk about what is bias, but I want to make sure all of our listeners stay engaged, because while our conversation really is around what's happening in the corporate space, it happens in every organization. Whether you're a community advocate for some sort and you really want to make sure you get the best traction and the momentum in your movement, these are the same things you have to watch out for. If you're in a faith-based organization or a church, biases show up. And so we need to really pay attention, and especially in entrepreneurs, when you're building out your business or starting it up, or even you've been in business a long time, watch out for these traps that not only happen in corporate America, the
Yep.
Fortune 500, 1,000 companies, but it can happen in any organization.
Mhm.
And it really can stunt your growth, or, give you a bad reputation in the marketplace. Or if you are one that's employed or a member of that organization, it could really damage your psyche and things like that. So it's good to be aware of it. So when we talk about bias, we're talking about the fact that you have a bent or inclination towards a certain thing or person just because of who they are, right? And so in some of my posts leading up to this conversation, I mentioned if you have somebody who is really into fitness and they're really looking for someone to teach their kindergartners, and that person happens to be overweight, and they don't choose that person regardless of their qualifications simply because they're overweight and that person's in
Right.
fitness. That's just some of those things. That's an example of, or even when we're talking about promoting someone, if you're a male and you are in the leadership role and you think less of that single mom who's holding it down with her three kids, still meeting every deadline, still contributing to the conversation of how to strategize and move your organization forward, and yet, when it comes to promotions, she's not selected. When it comes to opportunities to present your organization in the public, she's not presented. So we really, really need to pay attention to those things. We have a quick question here. Does the word bias translate into prejudice? I would say it's really, really close. And I think there's a scale, if you will. There's a of bias, if you will, where it could just have a kind of, I know I have inclination towards that, but I'm still open, or I just hate people in that way and I stay away from them and I don't give them the opportunities. But it is very close. It is very close to prejudice. What do you think about that, Carice?
Yeah, I think that's a part of it, right? So, one of the things when we talk about biases, we have to understand that there is both conscious and unconscious bias, right? So, your unconscious biases may not necessarily be prejudiced to a specific person or group. It may be an experience that you had, or maybe it's an interaction, right? So, I know one of the examples I actually had the opportunity to go to a webinar recently, and there was a hiring manager there, and he was speaking about giving an interview. And he was giving a Skype interview because he was hiring during this time, and the person, their background was a little bit not really set up, and during the meeting, their internet actually got frozen. And so during this time, he was, as the picture froze on sort of that perfect moment, right, where he's looking at a photo that doesn't necessarily represent that person in the best light. He was aware of his own unconscious bias, and what he actually did was close down that laptop and continue the meeting just by hearing what the person had to say, right? So sometimes it's not necessarily prejudice about a specific person or a group of people or background. But it's really in those specific moments where you may have an opportunity to be biased by something that's happening on in that moment, and being aware of that and really pivoting as you can.
Correct. So again, good morning to everyone. You are watching Watch Your Step. This is our final episode in Watch Your Step, but we do want to continue the conversation after this. And I am Yvette Owens, and this is Carice Williams, and we are sharing our thoughts around biases and the spectrum of biases. That's the word I was looking for when we were answering that last question. Does the word bias translate into prejudice? And I think it's a spectrum of biases, and on that far spectrum, end of the spectrum, it certainly is resulting out of prejudice against people. But again, as you said, the gentleman was interviewing, the woman's picture or video froze in a very unfavorable place, and he realized that I'm probably going to have a negative impact toward or thought process around this person. So let me not take that visual into play in my decision making.
Right.
And I think that's where we want to get to everyone, is that we all have biases.
Right.
The world should be right. We're not trying to say the world is going to be bias free. We just say be conscious of them and know how to manage through them. Right. Know how to manage through them so that you become less biased, and it doesn't impact your decision making when it's really critical to you or someone else.
Right. Yes. Yep. Absolutely. I think that is probably one of the best depictions that we've seen of someone just being able to understand that, hey, this is something that we all have. If I'm being intentional and I'm being aware, I can actually see and recognize when I'm having my own biases, whether unconscious or not, right? Once they come to the forefront, how can I shift that? Because we're all going to have those moments, and it's really up to us and our obligation to make sure that we're treating everyone fairly, really based on the work that they're doing and what they're bringing to the table, and not outside influences or factors.
Right. And I tried to stress that in my book when I started out. This is what this book is about and what it's not about. And
right.
Really, because I really believe in my heart of hearts that if I confronted some of those people who treated me unfairly, some of those people who were I'm saying some, if I really brought to the attention that, hey, this scenario when the gentleman was being I mentioned around in the section around, am I auditable? And for whatever reason, people were over talking me, or whenever I was speaking at the table, and I've never, ever had anybody say to me, my voice is not audible or loud. But if I would bring up something, then somebody would overtalk me in that situation, as if I didn't exist, as if my voice was not in the room.
Yep.
So some of those people, now the gentleman who played it out the second time, another time after that, and I happened to say something while he was speaking, he played that back to me. Oh, am I auditable? But I wasn't trying to do what he was doing, but he was being flipped when he did that. But if some of those other people in that room, if I mentioned to them, hey, this is what was happening, and I don't know if you were playing a, you are aware of it, they would, I believe some of them would be like really sorrowful
Yep.
because they were a part of that conversation. Now,
Right.
clearly, one woman who was also a minority in the room, she came to my defense at one time and said, hey, Yvette's trying to say something here because she saw the pattern happening. And I think, and we've talked about this before, organizations keep going on, and it's those of, and then all of a sudden they become aware that they haven't done something right to the minority group, right? To that diversified group. And then they try to flip the script and do better. But when you've been jaded for so many years
Right.
and you've been the recipient of so many injustices or so many biases, it's hard to believe that, okay, I see you flipping the script. I see you trying to go another direction, but it's way too slow for me and it might be way too late.
Right. Right.
Right.
And I think that was one of I'm glad that you brought that up, because how, when we talked about it, right, we talked about some of the experience and sort of as you're more seasoned in your career, right, you can pick up on some of those things that a lot of companies, when they speak on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and belonging, actually, or when they talk about how they're dealing with bias, if you're not conscious of the lens that you need to have on when you're taking in that information, or when you're researching a company that you're trying to go to, then you're actually doing a disservice, because what a lot of those companies do is that they're really great at talking the talk but not actually walking the walk. So
Right.
for you, as someone who has experience, and even within that jadedness, right, it's actually a powerful tool for you to be able to actually research companies and filter out what actually is the message that they're putting out there on the forefront, and really dressing it up, and what's actually happening. So that can actually really be a powerful tool as you go through your career, and understand what companies haven't done right, and really make sure that you can research going forward. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Are you hearing that?
Um, I'm not, but I can plug in the cord and see if it's happening.
Okay, I just wanted to check if everyone on the
It's-
line can actually hear
yeah,
us.
if
Without
you're on,
feedback.
and I see we have several people on. If you're having difficulty hearing us, let us know. Oh, okay. So yeah, they are hearing the feedback. So we'll try to correct that. Thank you for letting us know. I wanted to bring that up also again because we want to make sure people have a lens not only from our conversation of corporate. Is it better? Let us know if the sound gets better from corporate, but also from any organization. Correct?
Yes.
And it can. So in let me just talk from either advocate organizations or faith-based organizations. If it's a family that really started it or a group of friends that really started it, we have a tendency to have go-to people,
Hmm.
either our families, and we say we are all family, and or we're all in this together, but you're really only listening for the voices of where we should be going, where we should be heading, from just that small little nucleus of groups. And therefore, the rest of the congregation or the rest of your community group is not feeling engaged at all to contribute. And so it's easier for them to drop out
Hmm.
because whenever someone's not engaged, they drop out.
Yep.
And so it's important to make sure that we're not having biases even in the thought process, the decision process, to to really include as many diverse folks as possible.
Right. And I think that even goes back. That was a good example to really talk about when we really talk about prejudice and bias, right? And that being on the extreme end, because here, even bias and judgment, right, where we only go to our friend group or the people who are our trusted advisors, just because of what relationship we've had with them or experiences that we've had. So that's our own internal bias, because now those are the people that are qualified to actually really give you that information. So even in terms of really being able to say, hey, am I giving other people opportunities? Am I really only being um, sort of focused on one voice and one type of messaging in one area, and am I really hearing others? That's a way to combat that type of bias. How are you actually engaging with folks? Are you making sure that all of the voices are heard and opinions and the decisions that you're making reflect the entire body rather than the select few?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So, if you have questions around this topic, please post them, or if you have some thoughts, please engage in the conversation. Hopefully, the feedback has lessened.
Yes, I think we're good now. Um,
Yeah. Uh,
recording. Yep.
oh, awesome. Because we do want to make sure that you can hear us clearly.
Yeah, and we want to hear from you as well, right? So if
Right.
you've had experiences, any experience with bias, and sort of any advice on how to combat that, or if you've actually had your own bias and how you could have mitigated that or taken a different route, those are things that we want to hear from you as well.
Right. And in my book, I mentioned there's a chapter about Cobra in the conference room, and the leader who really had that. I mentioned Witches Cove, right? That they really were sticking together. They were set up to be able to respond to whatever she needed, so that they all looked like they were very up and with it.
Hmm.
Clearly, they were biases towards those folks, as opposed to being open to anyone else. And I do hear the feedback again, so I'm not sure what's
Yep.
happening. But she was clearly biased towards the people in her clique. She was new to the organization. She brought in new people. She brought in her own people with her, and they were all positioned in places for better opportunity. So she was less open to any new talent or anyone else new to her, because she was really, in my mind, setting herself up for success. And when leaders do that and they rely on their go-to people, they really want to be successful. And nothing's wrong with wanting to be successful, but you have to be open to bring other people along with you and to widen your circle. And you
Absolutely.
do that when you're being biased towards people.
Yep. And I know that there's great research out there that actually talks about managing performance and career advancement. And that's one of those things, right? When you understand who really in your organization has access to sponsors, how they have access to stretch assignments or networks, and really being able to engage with leadership. If you can't look around, or when you do look around, there's only a set number of people who actually have that type of access opportunity, then that's a way of understanding that, okay, maybe there is some bias here, right? There are folks that we are preferentially selecting that are getting these opportunities. And actually, this is a good way of showing unconscious and conscious bias, because you may be having that in an unconscious way when you're really looking towards your career, right? And you're sort of leaning on folks who you think are your trusted advisors and sort of the people who you believe deserve it. But that's from your frame of lens of career advancement. And it may not be conscious. But then one of the things that we talked about, Yvette, was a lot of the times corporations are actually intentional about the people who they take to represent them. So one of the examples that we used was sort of those leadership conferences, right, or even diversity and inclusion conferences. I can remember a time where I have had non-people of color who have attended diversity and inclusion conferences to represent the company, over people of color, right? And a lot of that has to do with how the company or the organization wants to be represented. What's the messaging that they want to put out there, and who do they believe that can deliver that? That is directly an example of conscious bias. Whereas if you're really giving some people more opportunities just because those are the people that you lean on, and you may not be fully aware, then that's unconscious. So understanding where you are and sort of what types of biases are really happening around you is powerful to really understand how much is your company listening to you and investing in diversity and inclusion, and is that a space that you can really grow and have a career trajectory in?
Right. So you do have choices. You do have power to
Yep.
join the organizations and the groups that you want to be a part of. Um, I am not sure about this feedback. I'm going to try to keep pressing through. You do have choices. Just know what to watch out for and what's important to you, which gets us back to the conversation we had last week about what's your value statement.
Yeah.
And if you know your value statement, then you know what's going to work for you. And I heard just the other night, someone talk about, and I mentioned it in my book about corporate fit, having a corporate fit, and you fit one day, and then you go down in a couple of years, you no longer fit anymore. And this person said they stopped asking if people fit in their corporate in their corporation, and were they a culture? Did the culture fit for them? And so basically, it's not so much are you fitting into the culture, but can you come in and as a culture can expand and be able to wrap them, include you into that conversation. So I'm probably not saying it as articulate as that leader did, but it was really phenomenal in that they broadened it as opposed to are you a good fit, but as a culture, are you a culture fit, to that. And I'll find it and I'll post it so that I'm doing it justice later.
Yep. I also heard a leader say, are you a culture fit, but are you a culture ad?
Culture ad, that's it. It was culture
Okay.
ad. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Are you a
Culture ad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's powerful, right? But where a lot of organizations really can fall into a trap there is if we actually don't set up the proper infrastructure in place for you to come in and add and really speak your voice and bring what you are to the culture and really expand it. If we're just sort of relying on you to do all of the work, right? And then you don't really get those opportunities. Just bring, and that's one of the things that we talk about when you actually bring great talent into an organization, but then you talk about in your book after a year or two, what happens? All of the growth and potential that you have and that you were promised really in the trajectory that you were going, you really get into an organization and those things are not optimal and those opportunities aren't there anymore. So as you go into organizations, if you're already there, how can you be um, more cognizant of what's going on around you, and how can you do your research if you're looking to get into a company to make sure that that is the culture that you can add to.
Right. Right. So it's culture ad, not culture fit. That's right. That's exactly what you did. So just to recap, we're talking about biases and being aware of the biases you might have towards other people, being aware that companies from the most conservative have biases, like my hair is not cultural fit for some organizations. And when I chose to go to locks, I did it very consciously and knowing the risks that I was taking and doing that. We're wearing the twist outs and we're wearing more natural looks. So hopefully organizations are shifting to appreciate that more. But when we were starting to do that, that wasn't you were basically cutting yourself. You were putting that ceiling over top of you because you didn't fit and you weren't the profile that they wanted to show in the public. So we do want to, and I apologize for the feedback that you're getting. I'm not sure quite where it's coming from. We will look into fixing this for future time. We do want to make sure that you're aware of, and I hear it less when you talk, so maybe you want to talk about what we're planning to do on the 30th around the in the room live conversation that we're going to have, Carice, where we're going to invite people to join the live conversation through Zoom.
Yes, I'm sorry, you were frozen. So
Oh.
I just caught the
Oh,
tail
sorry.
end of that.
This is really acting crazy today.
Okay. So yes, what we want to do is we actually want to hear from more of you and really connect with our audience. So what we want to do is do a live Zoom call where we're talking about some of the similar topics that we talked through today, because a lot of those relate to Yvette's book. So it's really going to be a book discussion talking about really how are you navigating within the corporate space. What are the tips and tools that we are aware of that can help you, and how can we actually come together and share our experiences? Because what we really want to do is hear from you. A lot of the times when we're in organizations, we actually don't get the opportunity to have really open and candid conversations with each other. So we want to provide this opportunity to really connect with you guys, have some really great dialogue, and hopefully we can all learn from each other and go ahead and be a culture add to our organizations.
Yeah, definitely. So there's actually two conversations. There's the live conversation we want to have, and both of them are live. One is we want to hear from you. What's your interest? Where's your concerns? What would you like us to all just chime in and collaborate on? And then two, a follow-up conversation around the book, Conquering Corporate Enemies, Mind, Personalities, and Situations. I do have a workbook now that goes along with it. So if you've been in some of those situations where you've just been overlooked because of who you are, your color of your skin, you know, I talk about a black male who basically had to stay to himself because, you know, all of a sudden his white female counterparts were threatened or not feeling comfortable, but that became his issue and not theirs. I talk about, you know, obviously the scenarios where I had someone who wanted to mentor me and was mentoring me, but was just pouring in toxic things. The conversations weren't healthy. And I felt more weighted down and than I did feeling uplifted. And while you wanted to mentor me and help me along, you weren't helping me in a space that in anything tangible or materialistic. So we'll talk about how did I overcome those and the decisions of when I became intentional about me, not depending on anybody else bringing you along. And a lot of people will talk about you need sponsorship, right? And you need people to help you make it to the next step. And sometimes you do. But sometimes that sponsorship is not available. And you have to figure out how you're going to get there on your own and build your own network and not depend on somebody else's network. So there'll be a link that we'll share where you can actually sign up. You do have to register just so we can know who to let into the Zoom room. We will not put that out on public just because of some of the issues that people have been having with Zoom. But you will have to register just so you can get into the room. Please join us for that conversation. Again, that's May 30th. It's going to be around 9 o'clock. So bring your breakfast and all so you can just have the conversation. And we purposely did that because we know the weather's getting better and people want to get out. And so we don't want to try to compete with you getting into your day. So that's why we struck a little earlier. And then a couple weeks after that, we will host a conversation and a workshop actually around the book Conquering Corporate Enemies. Thank you for those who have joined us. Again, I am Yvette C. Owens, and this is Carice Williams. I do coach people. I coach those who feel like they're not satisfied where they are and want clarity on where they're going. So if you want to work with me or you know somebody that should work with me, please connect with me and I will be able to talk with them further how we can work together. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Carice, again for this series. It's been fun. It's really been fun. And we'll continue to work. And that's another reason why we wanted to have the conversation, live conversations, because we normally talk for another half hour after we get off the broadcast with you all. And we want you to be a part of those intimate conversations.
Yes, absolutely.
And hopefully the feedback is not so disruptive that you could really hear what we're saying. We do apologize for that again. Enjoy yourself, enjoy your weekend, and remember, stay safe. Nothing is worth you losing your life over. So stay safe and keep your family safe. Thanks again.
Thank you.